Wake up. Can you hear me? Are you okay?
Choi Jinwoo didn't have time to consider the shipment at the docks. No time to think about the boardroom coup or the tightening police net. Right now, his cold, calculated world had narrowed down to one impossible image. Kalia Brooks was dying on his welcome mat. He reached down, his fingers brushing the coarse, rain-soaked fabric of her red delivery jacket, a startling splash of crimson against the sterile, gray marble of his penthouse foyer. When he lifted her, the lack of weight made him stumble. She was as light as a shadow. It was as if, during the 6 months she had been bringing his late-night meals, she had been slowly evaporating while he looked right through her. Jinwoo sprinted toward his private elevator. The rain from her clothes lashed his face, and his handmade Italian loafers skidded on the wet stone, but the precision he usually obsessed over was gone. Kalia's blood was already soaking into his white silk shirt, spreading in dark, sticky blossoms. Beneath the layers of her work uniform, he could feel her heartbeat, a frantic, fluttering bird trying to escape a cage. The elevator doors hissed open to his private floor. His 2 senior guards stood frozen, eyes wide as their boss. A man who prided himself on never being touched burst through the doors with a bleeding courier in his arms. Jinwoo didn't waste a breath on explanations. He kicked open the door to his private infirmary, a room he had built for gunshot wounds and the violent costs of his syndicate. He had never imagined he would use it for the girl who delivered his espresso. He laid her on the stainless steel table. Under the harsh, surgical lights, Kalia looked even worse. Her braids were matted with grit from the street, and her skin had turned a frightening, translucent blue. Her eyelids were partially open, showing only the whites. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He grabbed the secure line and dialed his private surgeon. His voice, usually a calm instrument of terror, was sharp and jagged as broken glass. "Get to the penthouse now. I don't care about the protocol. If she doesn't wake up, you'll never see the sun again." He slammed the phone down and turned back to her. For the first time, Choi Jinwoo actually looked at her. Not as a service he paid for, but as a human being. He saw the calluses on her hands from gripping handlebars in the winter, the small, jagged scar on her chin, and the sheer exhaustion etched into her young face. She had been a ghost in his life for half a year, a shadow moving through the city to serve his needs. And tonight, that shadow had crawled through the rain to his doorstep to warn him of a betrayal that would have ended him. Jinwoo reached out, his hand instinctively closing around her ice-cold fingers. In the silence of the high-tech room, he realized with a jolt of genuine fear that his own hand was shaking. "Hello, family. I would love to know where you are watching from. Kindly drop it in the comment section and also subscribe to this channel." Now let's continue with the story. The heavy double doors of the private medical wing hissed open as Dr. Han hurried in, his face tight with the middle-of-the-night urgency Choi Jinwoo demanded. He didn't ask questions. In this penthouse, questions were a liability. He moved straight to the stainless steel operating table where Kalia lay, her red delivery jacket now a shredded, sodden ruin on the floor, replaced by the clinical white of a surgical drape. Jinwoo stood by the window, the city lights of Seoul blurred by the relentless rain streaking the glass. He was usually a man of absolute stillness, but today his eyes wouldn't stop darting back to the monitors, watching the jagged green line of her pulse. It was too slow, too fragile, like a flame being choked by the cold. "The blood loss is significant, Jinwoo SSI," Dr. Han muttered, his gloved hands moving with practiced precision as he cleaned the wound on Kalia's shoulder. "But it isn't the cold or the exhaustion that almost killed her." Jinwoo turned, his eyes narrowing. "Explain." The doctor held up a pair of surgical forceps. Clamped in the metal teeth was a small, mangled piece of lead. "This wasn't a stray shot from a street mugging. This is a 9 hollow point, standard issue for professional security or high-level enforcement." He dropped the bullet into a metal tray with a clinical clink that sounded like a death knell in the silent room. "And there's more. Look at the entry angle. She wasn't standing when they shot her. She was already on the ground. This was an execution attempt, not a warning. A cold, familiar fury began to coil in Jinwoo's chest, sharper and more dangerous than any business rivalry. He looked at Kalia's pale, bluish skin and the rough calluses on her fingers. She was a courier, an endurance athlete who lived on tips and tight deadlines. She had no place in the world of 9 hollow points and calculated executions. She shouldn't have been able to move after this, Han continued, his voice tinged with a rare note of respect. But she crawled. The bruising on her knees and elbows suggests she dragged herself several blocks through that storm just to reach your gate. Jinwoo reached out, his hand hovering over the edge of the table. For years, he had built his empire on the idea that people were merely assets to be moved or obstacles to be cleared. But as he looked at the woman who had bled all over his marble floors just to bring him the truth, he realized that the shadow he had ignored for 6 months was the only person in his life who wasn't a liar. "Save her, Han," Jinwoo said, his voice dropping to a jagged, cold whisper that rang through the empty room like steel. "Because once she wakes up, I'm going to find out which of my men thought they could kill someone under my protection. And then I'm going to bury them myself." While Dr. Han worked in the hushed, rhythmic silence of the infirmary, Jinwoo retreated to the darkened command center of his penthouse. His fingers moved across the glass interface of his console with a cold, predatory precision. He had recovered Kalia's cracked delivery helmet from the foyer, its plastic casing scuffed and stained with the same city grime that now marred his expensive rugs. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he bypassed the encryption and pulled the local storage from the helmet's wide-angle bodycam. The screen flickered to life, showing the world from Kalia's perspective. The footage was shaky, distorted by the vibration of her scooter and the relentless lashing of the rain. He watched her navigate the rain-slicked streets of Seoul, weaving through traffic with a desperate, practiced speed that made his chest tighten. She wasn't just working. She was racing for her life against a clock that never stopped ticking. The video transitioned as she pulled into the loading bay of a high-end commercial complex. The audio was a cacophony of howling wind and the heavy thud of her boots on wet concrete. She was taking a shortcut through the darkened service basement, a labyrinth of concrete pillars and flickering fluorescent tubes she clearly knew by heart. Suddenly, the camera jerked. 2 black sedans, cars Jinwoo recognized with a sickening jolt of his heart, blocked her path. Kalia skidded to a halt, her breathing heavy and ragged in the microphone. 3 men stepped into the frame. They weren't rivals. They weren't street thugs. They were wearing the charcoal gray tactical gear of Jinwoo's own elite security detail. In the center stood Park's personal driver, holding a heavy envelope. The exchange they were making with a rival syndicate member was unmistakable, a ledger of Jinwoo's offshore accounts. Kalia had blundered into the one secret that could dismantle his empire. "Hey, you're not supposed to be back here," one of the men roared, his hand reaching for his sidearm. The footage became a blur of motion as Kalia tried to turn her bike, but a gloved hand shoved her hard. The camera hit the floor, skidding across the grit, but it remained upright, angled perfectly to capture the horror. Jinwoo watched in a frozen silence as his own men he had trusted with his life, kicked the girl while she was down. Then came the flash of the muzzle. Kalia didn't scream. She only let out a sharp, choked gasp of air as she collapsed against the cold concrete. Thinking she was dead, the men retreated to their cars, leaving her in the dark. But as the taillights faded, the camera captured a small, blood-stained hand reaching out. She didn't stay down. With a resilience that bordered on the impossible, Kalia began to crawl toward the service elevator, her eyes fixed on the destination she knew would lead to him. Jinwoo slammed his fist into the console, the glass spider-webbing beneath his knuckles. He had spent 20 years believing his word was law and his men were shadows of his own will. But as the video looped on Kalia's broken, determined face, he realized the shadow had been him, and the only truth left in the world was currently bleeding out on his operating table. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the first thing Kalia heard as the darkness began to recede. It was a cold, clinical sound, stripping away the hazy memory of rain and the heavy smell of exhaust. When her eyes finally fluttered open, the harsh fluorescent lights of the infirmary felt like needles. She didn't see a hospital ward. She saw a room filled with high-tech equipment that whispered of secrets and wealth. And then she saw him. Choi Jinwoo stood at the foot of her bed, his silhouette sharp and imposing against the glass-walled backdrop of the city. He looked like a statue carved from obsidian, his white shirt still stained with the dark, dried blossoms of her blood. He waited for her to scream, or perhaps to weep. Most people did when they realized they were in the presence of a man whose name was spoken in whispers. Instead, Kalia's fingers curled into the expensive linen of the sheets, her knuckles white with a different kind of tension. Her voice was a raspy, jagged thread, but it carried no fear. "My bike," she croaked, her eyes locking onto his with a fierce, burning lucidity. "Is it totaled?" Jinwoo blinked, the question catching him off guard. "You were shot, Kalia. You almost died on my doorstep, and you're asking about a machine." "That machine was my rent," she snapped, the effort of speaking making her wince as pain flared in her shoulder. She struggled to sit up, ignoring the way the world tilted. "That machine was 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. It was the only thing keeping my family from the street while you sit up here in your glass cage counting money you didn't earn." Jinwoo stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "My men did this. I know what happened in the basement." "Then you know your business just cost me everything," she said, her voice rising with a raw, tremulous anger that echoed off the stainless steel walls. "I've spent 6 months bringing you dinner while your thugs were planning to murder me in a parking lot. Do you even know how many miles I had to put on that bike just to pay off a fraction of what people like you take from the world?" For the first time in his life, Jinwoo found himself speechless. He was used to the invisible workers of the city, the maids who polished his floors to a shine every day, and the couriers who moved through the shadows of his life. He had lived 20 years without ever learning their names or their dreams. But as Kalia glared at him, refusing to play the part of the victim, he realized she wasn't just a shadow. She was the consequence of every choice he had ever made. "I'll replace the bike," Jinwoo said quietly, his hand instinctively reaching toward her, then stopping. "I don't want a new bike from a murderer," she spat, her eyes shimmering with tears she refused to let fall. "I want to know why your life is worth more than mine." Jinwoo looked at her ice-cold fingers and realized his own were still trembling. The wall between his penthouse and the filth of the city hadn't just been breached, it had been shattered. The heavy silence between Jinwoo and Kalia was shattered by the rhythmic chime of the elevator. Someone was bypass coding their way directly to the penthouse floor. Jinwoo's eyes snapped from Kalia's defiant face to the security monitors. It was Park, his second in command, flanked by 2 of the men from the bodycam footage. They were dressed in sharp suits, masks of professional concern plastered over their faces, but Jinwoo now saw the predatory glint beneath the polish. "Stay quiet," Jinwoo commanded, his voice a low, vibrating warning. He pulled the curtain around Kalia's medical bed, plunging her into a fabric-shielded shadow. He didn't have time to arm himself. He simply stood in the center of the infirmary, his blood-stained white shirt a testament to the chaos Park thought he had hidden in the rain. The doors hissed open. Park stepped in, his boots clicking with an arrogant rhythm on the marble floors that Grace, no, Kalia, had once crossed as a ghost. "Jinwoo SSI," Park began, his voice dripping with feigned urgency. "We heard there was a security breach at the gate. A delivery girl. My men are outside now, ready to sweep the perimeter and dispose of any mess left behind." Jinwoo watched Park's hands. The man was vibrating with a restless, nervous energy. As Park stepped closer, the tailored vent of his jacket shifted. There, tucked into a custom lumbar holster, was the distinctive matte black grip of a 9, the same caliber Dr. Han had just pulled from Kalia's shoulder. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a signature. "You're very efficient tonight, Park," Jinwoo said, his voice as cold and sharp as the surgical steel surrounding them. He didn't move an inch, blocking the path to the curtain. But the mess isn't at the gate. She's right here, and she has a very interesting story about a loading bay and a stolen ledger. The tension in the room snapped like a bone. Park didn't draw his weapon. He reached for the sleek tablet docked on his forearm and swiped with a jagged, frantic motion. Instantly, the high-tech sanctuary transformed into a tomb. A deep, mechanical thrum vibrated through the floorboards as heavy titanium shutters slammed down over the floor-to-ceiling windows, cutting off the flickering neon lights of Seoul. The warm, ambient glow was replaced by the rhythmic, pulsing crimson of the emergency lockdown lights. "The system is mine, Jinwoo SSI," Park sneered, his face distorted by the red strobes. "You built this fortress to keep the world out, but you've only succeeded in locking yourself in with the men who want you gone." A metallic hiss echoed through the vents, the sound of the private elevator and the stairwell doors magnetic locking. They were trapped 40 stories above the ground in a golden cage. Jinwoo felt the familiar weight of the room change. The air grew heavy, sterile, and lethal. He glanced toward the medical curtain, seeing Kalia's silhouette tensed and upright. She was a target now, a witness Park couldn't afford to leave alive. Park's men finally drew their suppressed pistols, the steel barrels glinting in the crimson light. "Give us the girl and the ledger, and maybe I'll let you die with the dignity of a boss," Park offered, his voice echoing in the sudden, oppressive silence of the sealed room. Jinwoo didn't answer. His mind was racing through the blueprints of the penthouse, blueprints he had memorized years ago. But he realized with a jolt of ice in his veins that Park had rewritten the access codes. The smart home he took such pride in was now an extension of Park's will. The lights flickered and died completely, plunging the room into a terrifying, pitch-black void, save for the faint green glow of the heart monitors. "Jinwoo," Kalia's voice came from behind the curtain, a low, urgent whisper that cut through the darkness. "Stay down," he commanded, his own hand finding a heavy surgical tray in the dark. He could hear the soft scuff of Italian leather on the floor. Park's men were splitting up, flanking the bed. The hunter had become the prey in his own palace. Jinwoo realized that in this darkness, his wealth and his title meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was the weak heartbeat of the girl behind him and the predatory breathing of the traitors in front. The lockdown wasn't just a security measure, it was the beginning of a hunt. And for the first time in 20 years, Choi Jinwoo was on the wrong side of the glass. In the suffocating darkness of the medical wing, Jinwoo felt the walls of his own creation closing in. The infrared sensors of the security system, now controlled by Park, glowed like malevolent eyes in the dark. He could hear the heavy, rhythmic footsteps of the tactical team closing in, their suppressed weapons clicking as they cleared the corners of the foyer. "They're coming," Jinwoo breathed, his back against the medical curtain, his hand tightening around the cold metal of a surgical tray. "And I've locked us in a tomb." "Not a tomb," a voice whispered from behind him. The curtain was pulled back. Kalia stood there, clutching a hand to her bandaged shoulder, her face a mask of sweating, agonizing determination. She wasn't looking at the reinforced titanium doors or the luxury foyer. She was looking at the ceiling, specifically a small, nondescript ventilation grate tucked behind a supply cabinet. "I've spent 6 months in this building, Jinwoo," she panted, her voice steady despite the pain. "While you were taking the private elevator, I was learning the guts of this place. Every high-rise has a service shadow. Trash chutes, laundry lifts, the maintenance shafts the couriers use when the freight elevator is down. Your security doesn't watch the veins, only the skin." Before he could protest, she moved. With a burst of strength that defied her bluish skin and fragile frame, she kicked the cabinet aside. "Behind that panel, it's a bypass for the industrial laundry chute. It drops 3 floors into the secondary maintenance hub. From there, I can get us to the courier exit in the basement. It's a route that doesn't exist on your smart map." Jinwoo looked at her, the girl he had treated as a ghost, now standing as his only guide through the labyrinth he thought he owned. The sounds of Park's men grew louder. A flashbang grenade skittered across the floor outside the infirmary doors. "Go," he commanded, helping her into the narrow, dark opening. As they slid into the cold, metallic throat of the building, Jinwoo realized the irony. He had spent his life building walls to keep the filth out, but now his only hope for survival lay in the hidden, gritty pathways used by the very people he had ignored. Kalia moved through the darkness with a frantic, instinctive confidence, her red jacket a fatting ember in the shadows. She wasn't just a delivery girl anymore. She was the architect of his escape, navigating the invisible doors of a world he was seeing for the very first time. Under the flickering emergency lights of the maintenance shaft, Choi Jinwoo followed the shadow, finally realizing that the view from the top was nothing compared to the strength of those at the bottom. The maintenance chute spat them out into the raw, industrial reality of the building's sublobby, a place of exposed pipes and humming generators far removed from the marble elegance above. Kalia leaned heavily against a concrete pillar, her breath coming in ragged hitches, the bandage on her shoulder blooming with fresh, brilliant red. They were only yards from the courier's exit, a heavy steel door that led to the rain-slicked freedom of the alley, when the lobby lights hummed to life, blindingly bright. "Going somewhere," Jinwoo Sasai. Park stood by the security desk, his silhouette framed by the glass expanse of the main entrance. He wasn't alone. For men moved out from the shadows of the elevators, their suppressed weapons raised. The lobby, usually a bustling hub of corporate activity, was a vast, hollow arena of polished stone and glass. "You're out of your element, Park," Jinwoo said, his voice a low growl that echoed through the cavernous space. He stepped in front of Kalia, his broad frame shielding her. "You think a lockdown and a few guns make you a king? You're just a thief in a tailored suit." Park laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "I'm a pragmatist, and pragmatism says I can't let that girl leave with a ledger." He raised his hand, a silent signal to fire. The first muffled cough of a suppressed round shattered the glass of a nearby decorative fountain. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He dived toward a heavy marble reception counter, pulling Kalia down with him. Stone chips sprayed over them like shrapnel. "The door," Jinwoo hissed, checking the chamber of a dropped guard's weapon he had snatched in the stairwell. "When I move, you run for that steel door. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," Kalia shouted over the deafening cracks of gunfire. "You're the only one with the truth," Jinwoo roared back. He rose from behind the counter, returning fire with a cold, terrifying precision that sent Park's men scrambling for cover. As Kalia lunged for the exit, Park stepped out from behind a pillar, his eyes fixed on her moving form. He leveled his pistol at her back, his finger tightening on the trigger. Jinwoo saw the movement, the same calculated, lethal intent he had seen on the bodycam footage. In a moment that defied logic, the man who had spent 20 years valuing only his own survival threw himself into the line of fire. The impact of the bullet spun Jinwoo around. A sharp, searing heat bloomed in his side, mirroring the wound Kalia carried. He hit the marble floor with a heavy thud, his $10,000 shoes skidding on the stone just as hers had hours ago. He lay there, gasping, the world turning a hazy, flickering gray. Kalia stopped at the door, her face a mask of horror. For a heartbeat, the power dynamic shifted entirely. The untouchable boss was on the ground, and the delivery girl was the only one standing. "Go," Jinwoo choked out, his hand clutching his side as the blood began to pool beneath him. "Deliver it." As she disappeared into the storm, Jinwoo looked up at the vaulted ceiling and smiled. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the one being served. He was the one who had finally delivered something that mattered. The sirens began as a low hum in the distance, cutting through the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the lobby's shattered glass. Jinwoo lay against the cold marble, his breathing shallow, watching the crimson pool of his own blood expand to meet the water trailing in from the street. Park stood over him, his face a mask of panicked indecision as the blue and red lights began to dance against the high ceilings. The golden cage had been breached, but not by a rival, by the truth. Jinwoo reached into his pocket with trembling fingers, pulling out his encrypted phone. He didn't call his lawyers. He didn't call his cleaners. Instead, he accessed the final fail-safe he had built into the syndicate's server years ago, a digital kill switch designed to incinerate his legacy if he ever lost control. But he wasn't using it to hide. He was using it to expose. With a jagged swipe of his thumb, he attached the bodycam footage of the basement execution, the decrypted ledgers of Park's betrayals, and 20 years of his own recorded transactions to a single outbound message. The recipient wasn't a business partner. It was the High Prosecutor's office. "What are you doing?" Park hissed, seeing the glow of the screen. He leveled his gun at Jinwoo's head, his hand shaking. "Delete it. Give me the codes or I'll end this right now." Jinwoo looked up at him, a faint, bloody smile touching his lips. "It's already gone, Park, all of it. The accounts, the properties, the names of every politician we bought. I didn't just burn your career. I burned the entire world we built." "You're going to prison for the rest of your life," Park screamed, the realization of his own ruin hitting him like a physical blow. "I've been in a prison for 20 years, Jinwoo rasped, his voice steady despite the searing pain in his side. "Behind glass walls, looking over the heads of people like Kalia, tonight I finally stepped outside." As the tactical unit swarmed through the main entrance, shouting commands and pinning Park to the floor, Jinwoo let his head fall back against the stone. He watched the digital upload complete notification blink on his screen before the phone slipped from his hand. He had spent his life winning a game that required him to lose his soul. To save the only person who had ever truly seen him, he had to destroy the board, the pieces, and himself. As the officers surrounded him, Jinwoo felt a strange, terrifying lightness. For the first time, he wasn't a boss, a predator, or a god. He was just a man waiting for the consequences of his life to finally arrive. 5 years later, the gray skyline of Seoul was the same, but the view from the ground had shifted. In the heart of the district where Choi Jinwoo's syndicate once ran its shadow operations, a new building stood, not of glass and steel designed to exclude, but of brick and light designed to welcome. The signage out front was bold and red, mirroring the jacket of a girl who had once collapsed in the rain, Brooks Logistics and Legacy. Inside the bustling hub, the air smelled of fresh coffee and the frantic, healthy energy of a business with a soul. Kalia Brooks stood at the center of the floor, her movement fluid and confident, though a small, faint scar still traced a line across her shoulder, a permanent reminder of the night the world broke open. She wasn't just delivering food anymore, she was delivering opportunity. Her company employed hundreds from the district, providing fair wages and the dignity she had once been denied. The glass doors hissed open, and a man stepped inside. He wore a simple, dark wool coat, a far cry from the $10,000 suits of his past. Choi Jinwoo, recently paroled after serving his time for the empire he had dismantled, walked with a quiet, grounded pace. He no longer looked over the heads of the people in the room, he looked them in the eye. He walked up to Kalia, handing her a tablet filled with the day's urban renewal data. "The community center in the lower district is finished," he said, his voice no longer cold like steel, but steady and warm. "We've redirected the last of the trust funds into the scholarship program." Kalia took the tablet, her fingers brushing his. The ice-cold trembling of that night in the penthouse was a distant memory. Now, there was only the shared warmth of a common goal. Jinwoo, once the king of a golden cage, had found a different kind of power, the power of a consultant for a woman who had taught him how to truly see. He didn't live in a penthouse anymore. He lived in the world he had once helped exploit, spending his days using his strategic mind to repair the very streets he had scarred. "Thank you, Jinwoo," Kalia said, offering a smile that held no trace of the old bitterness. He nodded, looking out the window at a delivery courier pulling away from the curb. The rain was beginning to fall again, but this time it didn't feel like a lash. It felt like a cleansing. Jinwoo realized that while he had lost his billions, his title, and his throne, he had gained something he never knew he lacked. He was no longer a shadow moving through a house of ghosts. He was a man standing in the light, finally home. Working for the girl who had delivered the only thing that ever truly mattered: hope.